I get a lot of requests to make videos like my favorite 10 engines, or the worst 5 engines of all time, or the best cars, the worst cars. And I admit, as a salvage yard owner and operator, I have quite an opinion on what's good and what's not. However, I don't really like making a lot of talking videos. I know I talk a lot in my videos, but there's also context. I like to show you guys why I think something is good or bad, not just tell you. That way you can form your opinion on what you can see and not what some guy on the internet tells you. And today we're going to tear down an engine that I'm not really fond of. I do not like these at all. And part of the reason I don't like the Mazda MZR or the 2.3 Duratec or whatever you want to call it is that the engines that this engine replaced were just better. The 2.5 liter KL Mazda engines, the 2 liter FS, while I don't love them, they were pretty good engines. The BPs were good, even the Miller cycle engines. I know I'm going to get some slack over that. But the L series engine, like this L321, I think is what it's called, it's a 2.3 liter 4-cylinder engine out of a 2005 Ford Tribute. I mean, a Mazda Escape. Nope. Mercury Mariner. Nope. Yes, an Escape, a Mariner, a Tribute, 2005 to 2007, had this 2.3 liter 4-cylinder as the base engine option, somewhere around 160 horsepower, and I don't like these. These things burn oil, nobody checks them, and you can't tell me a disproportionate number of people that own these cars versus everything else are just bad at maintenance. They didn't blow up their Toyota RAV4, but they sure will blow up one of these. I sold a lot of these engines over the years, and it's not that I think they're slow or they get bad gas mileage or they can't last. My brother had a 2005 Mazda Tribute with this engine with a manual transmission and all-wheel drive. It's a very rare vehicle, and it had 250 some odd thousand miles on it when he sold it. They can last, but they don't usually. Not all MZR-based engines were created equal. The 2-liter variant of this engine found in the Ford Focus and the Mazda 3, they're good. I hardly get asked for them. Very few requests on these engines, and if you do manage to blow a 2-liter up, it's because you did something really dumb. The engine that replaced this 2.3 liter in 2009 was a 2.5. Also, really good engines. The only time I sell them is when they get swapped into NC Miatas. But the 2.3 liters, and I know that's a blanket statement. There's several different variants of this engine with the 2.3 liter displacement. But if you bought a naturally aspirated 2.3 liter powered vehicle, they burn oil. They all do it. And most people don't check their oil enough. We've seen this on the channel multiple times. And if you happen to buy the turbo version in the CX-7 or the Mazda Speed 3 or Mazda Speed 6, and I've torn down several of those on the channel, you're a glutton for punishment. This engine I actually have details on. I hardly ever have details on engines, but not only do I have details like the fact it's out of a 2005 Tribute with 158,000 miles on it, I have a run video. I know. It's only happened one other time in the past, and it doesn't sound good, does it? It's got a little bit of macaroni and cheese in it. So we're going to tear this thing down. I bet we're going to find what you think we're going to find, and there's not really a ton of part value in these engines. It's just pretty much for the video. This was out of my brother's vehicle that he bought with a bad engine and replaced the engine and sold it. So this was a donation. You all owe my brother a huge thank you for that, and this is probably scrap metal. The first thing we're going to do is turn this engine over. Now, this has been sitting in my brother's garage for several years, so it may have a problem here, or it might just be fine. I'll see it's fine. It really doesn't sound too bad. I don't hear Uncle Rodney missing in there. Maybe a little bit. Next, let's pull the plugs. Oh no. Is there part of a coil boot in? No, there's just a bunch of debris in there. Let's just try harder. Nope. We'll skip it. Go to the next. Well, it might have needed a valve cover gasket, at least for a long time. What's the worst that could happen here? See if that helped. Must have moved something out of the way. Well, I don't see anything bent or broken or smashed, so that's good. They don't look great, and the spark plug tubes were filled with oil, which meant that the engine had a bad valve cover gasket, which is a very common problem. There's quite a lot of gap on those, but they don't look terrible. This one's got some buildup. I've seen worse. Now we're going to peel the valve cover off, and fair warning, this valve cover is off of the engine I bought for my brother. So it's not original to this engine, which is why everything's loose and has a bunch of blue junkyard writing on it. Now I get to play the game of which one is it. Not that one that just fell. Well, I've definitely seen worse on these engines, but there's quite a lot of varnish in the corners there. Almost has a little bit of a metallic hue. It's really hard to tell. No obvious signs of failure. All the valve train looks intact. Again, this was a running engine. The next thing I'd like to do is pull the intake manifold, and to do that, I need to remove the dipstick and dipstick tube. And I know it's early. We're just going to keep our fingers crossed, see if this works. Uh-oh. It's got oil in it. Ryan? I suppose that necessitates the next part where we need to drain the oil. Well, I can't get the drain plug loose. What? It's going to be like that. Okay. Yes. Yep, she's full. Well, this wasn't a clean pan to begin with, but there seems to be a little bit of metal in that oil. I know it's probably hard to tell on camera. It's not totally anti-seize. It's also not super clean. Normally I'd be pretty mad that one of the cores that were returned here had oil in it still, but it's my brother, and technically he never told me it was drained, just like the time I went over to his house to carry an RX-8 transmission up a ladder to put it on top of the pallet rack in his garage, and it puked gear oil down my leg while I was doing so because he didn't drain it. Sorry, Ryan, had to throw you under the bus. Let's get this intake manifold off. There we go.
I've done this before.
And there's probably one crankcase hose on the back of this. Yep. Oh, and there's a connector for the knock sensor. That knock sensor is working overtime in this engine. Yeah, that hose is starting to split. And you know what we do with hoses like that? We treat them with the utmost care and respect. But they were once upon a time a good hose. Well, we make an effort. That's what we do. And then when we get mad, we treat it with no respect. Let's take a peek down these intake ports. Looks pretty good. Also pretty good. Gotta love port injection. And looks like those valves are all the way down. Those look pretty good. When my camera focuses, that is. Next, while I've got the pan here, we're going to remove the water pump. This should just pry right out of here. Most of that went in the pan. Let's take a look at this thing. Spins nice. No rust on the impeller. The seal looks good. This looks like this is all corroded around here, but I don't know if that's coming out of the weep hole or not. Could have been a leak somewhere else. I think this is a good water pump. Yeah, this is a great part. Dum-de-dum-dum-dum. Next is a crank pulley, and a very common mistake that a lot of people made when working on these engines is swapping crank pulleys over, because without the proper timing tools, which is a piece that fits in the back of the block here that locks the crank, and a piece that slides into the back of the cams at the top of the head, this engine cannot stay in time if you remove the crank pulley. This is not keyed, a non-keyed crank, and I know a lot of people don't have problems with it. I don't like it. At Mazda's before the MZR engines, when they were Japanese designed engines, they had keyed cranks, and the people that were used to working on those engines didn't understand how important it was to keep the engine in time when you pull this bolt out. So they'd pull this bolt out, swap the crank wheel over, and it would be out of time. Actually, the yard management system that I use has a little note about that. So right here it says, do not pull harmonic balancer unless absolutely necessary. Warning, if motor spun over with harmonic balancer off, valve timing is thrown off, causing bent valves. Yelling that. In fact, I'm going to show you a thing. I think I can do this. All right, that's loose. See, it spins. What I'm going to try to do is turn the engine over so I can lock the cams, which is a maybe. You know what, we'll have to go forward. Okay. All right, now I'm going to lock the cams with a random piece of angle iron. That fits most of the way in there. We'll just, there we go. So there's a little slot cut in the back of the cams. This is kind of what the timing set looks like. Obviously, it's not a piece of scrap angle iron, but now the cams are locked. Should be able to get these off. Hopefully they're not too tight. No, they're pretty tight. Yep, they're pretty tight. Let's try harder. Okay, this works smarter. The only thing better than one wrench? 2 wrenches. All right, that one's loose. This is working so smoothly. And that one's loose. So these are not keyed at all. Now I know I risked bending valves doing this, but I'm turning the entire timing cassette now. Cams aren't moving, and since none of this is keyed, the only thing I'm actually turning, besides my glove, is the timing system. That's it. Now let's start peeling this apart. Instead of being keyed, they use this friction diamond crush washer. One-time use. They're very inexpensive. It's not really the worst thing. I mean, it's not the best thing. Next, we'll finish tickling the timing cover. We'll get the idler off. Whole bunch of 8mm. A 10 here. And 4 13mm. One here. And then 3 here. And these bolts, those long ones, make very good engine stand bolts. Next, the timing cover should just pop right off. So there's a few things wrong here. See that shiny spot right here? That's wear from the chain. And the reason that's worn is probably because there's slack in the chain. And as we can see, the timing tensioner looks like fully extended, which means the chain is likely stretched. That didn't just happen from me turning the chain over. Here's a better look of spinning that chain over. Let's see if I can do this. That's neat. Let's take a look at this timing. So I don't see any broken components. The rail looks like it's intact. Tensioner is fully extended, and if you look on the block here, some marks like the chain's been flailing around. The rest of this looks pretty decent, although it's probably from pulling the timing cover. Ooh, anti-seize, silvery sparkles. That's no good. Now we can peel the timing system off. We'll start with the tensioner. I had a little kick to it. Like I said, that rail looks excellent. Here's our chain. There's a little bit of wear. You can Can you hear that? Typically, these type of links are not supposed to have that kind of wear. And when you talk about chain stretch, that's what you're talking about. Where the pins go through these links, they oblong the holes. Just a little, but think about how many links are in here, and that will make a chain stretch. Now the last rail. Looks pretty decent. Let's see if I can see a date on it. Oh, hey, look, 04. It's original. Impressive. Next, it's time to cram the cam caps loose so we can pull the cams and have access to the head bolts. Uh-oh, just a little tap. Well, I must say, I am pleasantly surprised by the condition of these journals. I'm not going to call them mint, but they're definitely serviceable. And I did not expect that. After looking at what the inside of the oil pan looked like when I pulled the timing cover, I expected lots of debris and shrapnel damage. But I'm not seeing it. A little bit, but not a lot. Even the cams look pretty good. I think these would polish out. I didn't intend to get any sellable parts out of this, but maybe I'll get lucky and the cylinder head will be good. Cam caps definitely have some wear. They're not nearly as bad as I expected. This is usually where most of the wear exists. Softer metal and has the spring tension as force against it. This camshaft, a little bit of wear, nowhere near as bad as I've seen. It's probably the worst journal right there. All right, normally I wouldn't cut hoses, but this hose needs to be disconnected because it runs from this water outlet to this coolant manifold. And I know I could unbolt this stuff from the head and let it dangle, but it's going to get in the way, and I don't really feel like dealing with these spring clamps. So if you're a big fan of hose, look away. I'm going to remove these engine hooks just to get them out of the way. Now it's time to get the head bolts out. These are T55s. Now we can zip these out. All right, let's peel this thing off. Aha! A head gasket. Well, some of you astute viewers may already see a problem. Will you let... It's not that. Look at that piston. For reference, normal, not good. You can see how the crown of the piston is cleaned here and here, and that is from making contact with the cylinder head. And the only way that happens is if there's no rod bearing or it's been damaged. If you look really close, it looks like we have two new valve reliefs. Self-clearancing engines. They don't usually last. It's pretty wet in these cylinders. I'm going to wipe this all out so we can take a look at those bores, but first let's go look at that cylinder head. So the reason those cylinders were wet is the oil in the spark plug tube. When I pulled the plug, it ran down into the cylinder. These two cylinders, that's 4, that's cylinder 3. There's the culprit. You can see too, the combustion chamber is clean here and here. Is when that piston comes up, it squeezes all of that carbon off of it. And you can also tell that the valves kissed the piston. And I would wager that these are bent. Maybe not a lot, but a little is still bent. And it looks like this cylinder head may not make it back into the world. It might just be recycling at this point. I'll have to see what the head's worth. It's probably not worth putting a couple valves in and a valve job. Let's take a look at these bores. Cylinder 1. A little bit of wear, but it looks pretty decent. A couple scratches towards the bottom. Can't really see a lot there, but you can see that there's definitely going to be some damage to the cylinder walls. And that happens because the piston's allowed to travel too far down, and it knocks around back and forth, wears the skirt. You need bearings for multiple reasons. That one looks decent. That one looks pretty good as well. Now it's time to roll this thing over and hopefully not make a mess. Perfect. Next, it's time to pull the bearing basket, see what the rotating assembly looks like. Let's get old blue here, break the seal. Sparkles. So I know what you're saying. Oh, Eric, that just looks like oil. Well, nope. That's a whole ton of finely powdered rod bearing. You could call it rod bearing concentrate. I don't see any large chunks. Well, there's a few flakes. Pretty typical looking pan from one of these engines that's bad. Next, I'm going to need to lock this up somehow. Ooh, if I just keep doing that. Oh, my battery's dying. It doesn't like that. Because this is keyed, there's not a really good way of locking the oil pump up to get that bolt out. And I know what you're going to say. Put a screwdriver in it. That's a great idea. It's not working, guys. It worked. This was poorly thought out. Oh, see, it's fine. It's totally fine. There's no damage here. Before I unbolt the oil pump, I'm going to remove the pickup. Next, I'll unbolt the oil pump. Unfortunately, because of the design of the pickup, I can't get a really good look at the screen. I guess we could always... Nope. Let's try that again. Nope. That was bad. So don't do what I just did. That was super stupid. Might have been funny, but it was dumb. There's definitely a bearing fragment on the screen and a lot of metal gunk in here, not associated with cutting this with the improper tool. And next we'll take the oil pump apart, which is only held together by the bolts that hold it to the block. So I think that's how these are held together. Right? Right? I need a better hammer. It's getting there. There we are. No troubles. So I'm going to do my best to show the damage on this pump. It's definitely had some debris run through here. Look at those little divots. That's all from metal, foreign objects, foreign metal, in the oil going between the two gears of the oil pump. It leaves those little craters. It's a really good way to see that. I know my camera doesn't like to focus. There's also some damage on the outer part of that gear. And if you look inside there, similar divots. Next is the counterbalance cartridge. Now this is one big difference between the 2 liter and the 2.3. The 2 liter is a smaller displacement and it doesn't have this balance cassette. I don't know if that's why the 2.3s have the failures they have. I would struggle to believe that, but a lot of people do delete these in the turbo engines and don't seem to have very many issues. Next, we're going to do something I've never done to one of these engines. Take apart the assembly. Never done this. That should do it, right? I think if we just give it some taps. Yep. What if I use my chisel driver? So I'm not really worried about reselling this component. Oh, hey, look at that. We're getting places. We were getting places. Wow, look at that. That's neat. The oil in here is very metally like. So these have little replaceable bearings. They seem to be in pretty decent shape, but there's a lot of metal in the oil. I don't know if we can see that well. Oh, there we go. I think this thing just went way too long without an oil change a few times. The shafts don't seem to have very much wear. Pretty neat. Next, we'll remove this main cap girdle. It'll make taking the rods and pistons out a lot easier. This is in the way. There, fixed it. These are pretty easy to remove. Now we're going to turn the crank over. And you see how discolored that is? That's what it's supposed to look like. That's been cooked. And that's where the noise came from. The rest of them look pretty good. Cylinder 2, not good. Next, we'll get the rod cap bolts loose. Give it a little tap here. There's the cap, and there's first rod and piston out. I see what's wrong. That one practically fell out. Now it's time to remove the crankshaft. Let's get this thing is loose. It's probably going to come with it. Now when I pulled the crank, most of the rod bearings stayed on the crank and they feel like they're stuck. It's I have to pry them off. This is cylinder 1 here. Oh, well that's why. Cylinder 2, the offending one, clearly a spun bearing, totally deformed. I think it's welded to the crank. We'll get it. Will we? Yes. We'll use my chisel driver. It's like paper thin here. Success! Wow, those are very, very bad. Cylinder 3. And the other half cylinder 4. Let's start with what's left of the rod bearings. Cylinder 1, chunking away. Cylinder 2 was spun. That's the knocking cylinder. Look at the discoloration difference on the big end of the rod. It's a lot of heat, a lot of friction does that. And these are really thin and distorted, two-dimensional. You can see they're wider. One of these was conformed to the crank. I had to hammer it off. Cylinder 3, not good, but better. And cylinder 4 is the best of them all, which still isn't great. We've already looked at the rods. You can see the discoloration there. They usually get egg-shaped when they knock for an extended period of time. So that rod's going to be junk. This piston looks pretty decent. A little bit of skirt wear, but it's really not bad. But this one has the most skirt wear of them all. The wear isn't even that bad, but there's the damage to the crown, and there's the new valve reliefs. You don't need to take them to a machine shop to get valve release fly cut. You can just delete your rod bearings. The other two look pretty normal, just dirty, lots of carbon. That one's actually kind of stiff turnover. These are not full floaters, I don't think. They look like semi-floaters to me. Yep, nothing notable on those. Main bearings from front to back, they're actually pretty worn. They're not grooved up terribly bad, but they look like they're worn through the outer coating. Definitely not what you want to find. And the crankshaft has seen better days. You can see there's flakes of bearing material present on the journals. I haven't cleaned this up. There's the damaged one. Now, I suppose you could fix this. I've seen a lot of crankshafts fixed, but Ford crankshafts are the cheapest factory crankshafts out there. And I mean, no, there's nothing bad about it, but it takes a very special engine from Ford to have a valuable crank, or some of the older stuff that you can't buy new anymore. Now we can take a look at these bores. Not terrible. This is the offending cylinder. You can see that one's got quite a bit of wear. That's from that knocking around. But then you get back to cylinder 3. Wonder what causes that shadowing that we're seeing there. Cylinder's a little less pronounced. This engine was poorly maintained. There's no question about it. I know 158,000 miles may seem like a lot to some of you, but modern engines, and when I say modern, I mean within the last 35, 40 years, will go 200 to 250,000 miles as long as you maintain them, or it's not a Subaru or a rotary. With those exclusions, most engines will make it that far without major failure as long as you maintain it. So yes, 158,000 miles is a premature engine failure. And I have seen this time and time again with the 2.3s. This engine was not maintained. The top end had a lot of varnish. The bottom was so much worse. The chain was stretched, had been rubbing the timing cover and the block. The timing chain tensioner was fully extended. It probably made a bunch of noise from the timing cover, and they ignored that as well until it started hammering. And when that happens, it's too far gone. Then you're out the expensive engine, plus the labor. Ultimately, most of these cars aren't worth fixing at that point, and you just lose a bunch of money. I know most people don't treat cars as an investment, but you have to protect it the best you can. I don't want to sound preachy, I really don't, but check your oil regularly, change it regularly, and I'm not talking about every 15,000 miles. Before that, way before that. This engine didn't have a bunch of good parts. But if you'd like to buy anything out of it for your desk or anything else I've torn down, or if you'd like to buy parts off of this beautiful, smashed 328 manual E36 convertible, I'm going to leave our email in the video description. You can also go to importapart.com and peruse our inventory. I've been uploading our parts cars just about every single week. You all owe my brother a huge thank you for today's teardown because it was a freebie, and well, that's just what family does. I really hope you enjoyed this video. As always, I love all the comments, all the feedback, and even the criticism. I love it all, and I'll catch you on the next one.